As of about 10 days from now, we're going to start increasing to 2 million doses every single week, and we're continuing to work with partners like the United States to increase that. We're talking about getting close to 50 million doses by the end of June, and everyone will be vaccinated right across the country who wants it, fully vaccinated by September. So we're definitely on track, but we're working every single day to get even more doses in. We're going to continue to work very, very closely with the U.S., with others, to get more vaccines. We understand how important that is for Canadians, and we've demonstrated with increases in our Pfizer shipments, moving forward other shipments, reaching out to partners around the world, that we're now over 25% of Canadians have had at least one vaccine, and it's only going to accelerate in the coming weeks. We know how important it is to get through it, particularly with this third wave hitting hard in places across the country, including BC. So we're going to keep working and make sure we're doing everything we can. Every country is facing its own challenges. One of the things we did from the very beginning was ensure a really diversified supply of potential vaccines. We signed deals with about 7 different companies from around the world, sourced them from all different parts of the world, but you'll remember that particularly given the previous American administration stance, we did most of our sourcing from outside of the United States. Obviously, with the Biden administration, we're looking at actually shifting that around, but those conversations continue to be ongoing. We know that even with vaccines rolling in, public health restrictions are extremely important in terms of preventing the third wave from getting even worse. So as a federal government, our role is to support the provinces in the decisions they're taking. We do that by sending direct help to businesses, to families, to workers who get laid off. 8 out of $10 in support of families and people for COVID-19 comes directly from the federal government, and has from the beginning. We promise to have people's backs, and part of that is being there to support the provinces in sometimes the difficult decisions they have to make. Well, I mean, that's not exactly the role of the federal government to be telling provinces what to do. Provinces make the right decisions for their jurisdictions. But we've seen, for example, whether it was the Arctic territories bringing in a travel ban from the very beginning, or even the Atlantic bubble, that the federal government didn't have any role in imposing or judging or anything. We just support, and that was very effective. So we will be there to support the government of BC in the decisions that it takes to manage the spread of COVID in British Columbia. Our role is to be there to support with extra testing kits, with contact tracing, with any measures that BCers need. Well, obviously, it's extremely important to limit the importation of the virus, has been from the very beginning, and that's where we brought in some of the toughest travel measures of any of our peer countries way back in last March, a year ago, with the 2-week quarantine. As variants started to pick up steam elsewhere around the world, we brought in extra measures around Christmas time, the pre-boarding test, for example, and subsequently on-arrival tests and mandatory quarantine while the test results came before someone would go into quarantine. Obviously, we need to continue to be very strong on all those measures, and you know, I can reassure people that it is only a tiny fraction of the cases we have in Canada that are importation, but even with just a tiny fraction, it's really important that we continue to look into it and step up, and that's why I've been talking with officials over the past couple of days about what more we can do to make sure we are keeping our borders protected from further spread of variants. We're looking at all the range of potential measures, either targeting certain areas or certain types of travelers. We're going to be working with experts and with authorities across the country to make sure that what we're doing is grounded in science and going to keep people safe. But there's no question that continuing our strong measures at the border and perhaps enhancing them will be important. But the reality is it is community spread right now that is what we have to focus on, and we will continue to be there to support jurisdictions as they move forward on that. Actually, over the past number of months, we have been significantly increasing resources on spot checks and even visits as people are quarantining. Anyone who arrives has to demonstrate a full and responsible quarantine plan, and if they can't do that, then they get put into a government-approved quarantine facility for those 2 weeks. But I also want to remind people that it's not just the federal government with a responsibility to do follow-ups. Every local police force or local police of jurisdiction have the ability and the authority to participate in ensuring that those checks and that people are following the quarantine rules. And we've seen a number of local police forces applying some of the very big tickets and fines to people who haven't been conforming to the quarantine rules. We're going to continue to work together and make sure that people understand just how important it is to follow those rules. Well, first of all, as a reminder, we have some of the strongest measures in the world in terms of protecting our borders. And the other thing we've seen is there are direct flights from certain countries of concern, but there are also many, many indirect flights as well. And making sure that we have a system that is going to cover all arrivals in Canada is something we did months ago. As I said, we're going to be speaking with, I'm currently speaking with all our public health officials to ensure that we can and will move forward as necessary on strengthening measures depending on what the science and data is telling us. Well, actually, we paused flights from the UK for a short period of time while we brought in new measures. For example, the pre-departure test and then the on-arrival testing and quarantine, for example. We've already brought in those measures that are significantly stronger than what we had before, but we're, again, looking at what next and what more we can do to keep people safe. Every step of the way, this government has done what is necessary to keep people safe, and we will continue to do that. You know, on the land borders, again, there are very strong systems. People have to get tested. They have to have an approved quarantine plan. If they don't have an approved quarantine plan, they end up getting sent to a government-approved facility. The measures are significant, and we're following up very closely, and we're seeing that that's just not a significant vector for importation or community spread. But of course, we continue to be very, very attentive to the numbers we're seeing, to the results we're having, ensuring that there is enforcement of penalties and fines for people who avoid the restrictions, because they're putting everyone at risk. We're going to continue to do everything we need to keep people safe. Well, it was one of the conversations we had with the provinces way back last September that bringing in a sick leave system would be really important to encourage people to stay home if they came down with symptoms or if they had to self-isolate or get tested. And that's exactly what we did. But the federal government can seem very, very far from people's daily lives, and the measures that we have proven to be useful for many, many people, but still leave some gaps. And that's why I know that a number of provinces are looking themselves at how they can complete those gaps. As I said, the federal government is responsible for 8 out of every $10 of support through this COVID crisis, but we've also seen provinces willing to step up to fill some of those gaps and make sure that the most vulnerable are getting the supports they need to keep people safe. Well, first of all, that's why we brought in the federal program that gives $500 per week for people who are facing challenges because of a diagnosis or a test or a need to self-isolate or just a sniffle. That's there. We actually expanded that, extended it by 2 more weeks after having brought it in last fall, so that people can have it if they can. You can go on canada.ca to find out how to apply for it if people are facing that challenge. But we always know that the best approach is working hand in hand with provincial authorities as well, who have different tools. And, you know, BC may sometimes seem far, but I spent enough years living and being grounded in BC to know that people are always very aware when the federal government is there to support, but also looking to other supports locally. Hatred and intolerance in all its forms are absolutely unacceptable in Canada, and whether it's anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, or, as we've seen really troublingly, a rise in anti-Asian racism, we've continued to step up. We specifically put resources in this budget towards fighting racism in systemic ways, but also supporting community organizations, including specifically to support the fight against anti-Asian racism. We will continue to be there and make sure that jurisdictions have better supports, and that everyone understands that that is simply unacceptable in Canada. The reality is those allegations, when they came forward, were directed to the appropriate authorities to follow up on an investigation, and that's what our responsibilities are as politicians, to make sure that the right authorities follow up on those investigations. In this case, unfortunately, the proper authorities weren't able to get enough information to move forward with the investigation, but I've demonstrated many times, both as a leader but also us as a government, that we take this incredibly seriously. We've taken a number of steps over the past years. It's obvious we need to do more, and we will. No one who serves our country, no one who works anywhere in this country should be faced with intolerance or racism or sexual assault or intimidation or harassment. These are absolutely unacceptable. We need to make sure we're changing the culture of the military, but we also need to make sure we're providing resources for the women and men who serve in our military to be able to get the help they need and the support they need as survivors. That is one of the things we are working extremely hard to change. We need to make sure that anyone who comes forward with allegations or a concerning story or incident gets both the hearing, the support, the resources they need to be able to move through and make sure that there are follow-ups and consequences. This is something that we've seen the military just not do well enough at in the past, and that's why we're so deeply engaged in changing and transforming the culture for the better, so that everyone who serves does so in a safe environment.